There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when a woman stops running, not from danger, not from failure, from herself. It happens in silence. Maybe while driving alone at night, watching the road disappear beneath the headlights. Maybe in the stillness after everyone has gone to bed, and the noise of the day finally fades, leaving only her own heartbeat and a question she has avoided for years. What if everything you've been taught about confidence is wrong? Take a breath, just here, just now. Let your shoulders drop slightly, because what you're about to hear was never meant to be consumed quickly. It was meant to be felt slowly, like ink spreading through water, changing the color of everything it touches. Society tells women to become prettier, more successful, more productive, more positive, as if happiness were a renovation project, something you build room by room, until finally, someday it's finished. But what if confidence isn't something you build at all? What if it was never missing, only buried? Look closely at the women who radiate something you can't quite name. Not loudest in the room, not the most admired, not the ones with flawless skin or perfect relationships or lives that look, from the outside, like something out of a magazine. No, the truly confident ones carry a different kind of light. Quieter, steadier, like a candle that doesn't flicker no matter how hard the wind blows. And if you watch closely enough, you'll notice something strange about them. They don't perform peace. They simply have it. So what happened to them? What door did they walk through that so many others never find? They stopped abandoning themselves. Say that sentence again, slowly, in your mind. They stopped abandoning themselves. Because somewhere along the way, in childhood, in relationships, in rooms where love felt conditional, many women learned an unspoken rule. Betray yourself before the world can betray you. Silence your needs before someone else silences them for you. Shrink before someone forces you to. But the women who become truly confident, truly free, they break that rule. They face the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. They stop living for approval. They learn how to stand alone without feeling empty. And once that happens, something remarkable occurs. They become impossible to manipulate. Not because they grow cold, not because they build walls, but because they no longer fear the one thing that controls most human beings, without them even realizing it: the fear of being truly seen. Today, you will discover 5 deep psychological shifts, 5 quiet revolutions that transform ordinary women into quietly powerful, emotionally awake, genuinely happy human beings. And by the end of this journey, you may come to a realization that changes everything. The woman you've been searching for has been waiting inside you the entire time. Let's begin where all transformation begins, in the dark. Carl Jung once wrote that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we will call it fate. Read that again, because hidden in that single sentence is the reason so many people feel trapped in patterns they can't explain. Relationships that repeat themselves. Anger that erupts from nowhere. A quiet ache of unworthiness that no achievement seems to heal. Jung called it the shadow. Not evil. Not darkness in the way religion once painted it. The shadow is simply everything about ourselves we were never allowed to feel. The rage we swallowed as children because anger wasn't ladylike. The jealousy we buried because wanting more felt shameful. The neediness we hid because dependence made us feel weak. Every emotion society told us was unacceptable didn't disappear. It went underground, and what goes underground doesn't die. It waits. Imagine for a moment a house with a locked basement. You live upstairs, in the bright, tidy rooms, smiling, functioning, performing normalcy. But beneath your feet something stirs. Every emotion you refuse to feel is down there, growing heavier in the dark. And every so often, it finds a crack. It seeps upward. And you call it a bad mood, a trigger, an overreaction. But it isn't random. It's the basement, knocking. This is why a compliment can feel unbearable to someone who secretly believes they're unworthy. This is why abandonment in a relationship can trigger a grief that feels disproportionate to the moment. Because it isn't just about now, it's about every time, stretching back through childhood, when love felt uncertain. The present pain is only the surface. The shadow is the depth beneath it. And here is the part almost no one tells you. Your emotional triggers are not weaknesses. They are messages. Anger is not the enemy. It's information, telling you a boundary has been crossed. Jealousy is not shameful. It's a signal, pointing toward a desire you've been too afraid to admit. Insecurity is not proof that something is wrong with you. It's an old wound, still whispering, still asking to be witnessed. Most people spend their entire lives running from these signals, numbing them with distraction, with substances, with relentless productivity, with the exhausting performance of being fine. But the women who become truly confident do something different. They stop running. They turn around. They walk toward the basement door. This is what Jung called shadow work, and it is, without exaggeration, one of the most courageous acts a human being can undertake. Because to face your shadow is to admit things about yourself that contradict the image you've spent a lifetime building.
It means admitting, I am capable of jealousy.
I am capable of rage. I have needs I was ashamed to name. I have wanted things I was told good women don't want. And here is where the psychology becomes almost paradoxical. The parts of yourself you're most afraid to acknowledge are usually the very parts that once accepted set you free. Because what you resist persists. But what you accept transforms. There's a concept in Jungian psychology called projection, and once you understand it, you will never see human conflict the same way again. Projection happens when we cannot bear to see a trait in ourselves, so unconsciously, we place it onto someone else instead. The woman who cannot stand arrogance in others may be suppressing her own unclaimed confidence.
The person who is endlessly irritated by someone else's neediness may be terrified of their own need for connection. We don't just see other people.
We see reflections of the parts of ourselves we've refused to meet. This is why the people who trigger you the most are often your greatest teachers. Not because they're always right, but because the intensity of your reaction is pointing you somewhere important. Back to yourself. Picture a woman. We'll call her the version of you that existed before the world handed you its rules. As a child, she felt everything fully. She cried without shame. She got angry without apologizing. She wanted things loudly, without fear of being called too much. And then, slowly, the conditioning began. Be quiet. Be nice. Don't make people uncomfortable. Smile, even when you don't feel like smiling. Every one of those moments taught her the same lesson. Your authentic self is not safe. Hide it. And so she did. She built a persona, a mask, polished and smiled and performed for approval. And for years, maybe decades, that mask kept her safe. It got her love, or something that resembled love. It got her acceptance. But it also came at a cost that few people calculate until much later in life. Because every year she wore the mask, the woman underneath it grew fainter, quieter, more distant, until one day she looked in the mirror and felt an eerie, unfamiliar sensation. I don't know who I am anymore. If you've ever felt that strange hollowness beneath a life that looks fine on paper, understand this. It is not a flaw in you. It is the natural consequence of self-abandonment. And self-abandonment, more than any external circumstance, is the true root of unhappiness. But something shifts when a woman begins shadow work. Something almost imperceptible at first. She starts noticing her triggers instead of just reacting to them. She starts asking, in the middle of an emotional storm, what is this really about? She starts sitting with feelings she once ran from. Not indulging them, not suppressing them, but witnessing them, the way you'd sit beside a frightened animal until it finally, slowly, begins to trust you. And in that witnessing, something extraordinary begins to happen. The emotions that once controlled her begin to lose their grip. Not because she's fixed them, but because she's no longer afraid of them. This is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a whole person, instead of a fragmented performance of one. Self-awareness creates self-mastery, not perfection, not the absence of darkness. Mastery, the capacity to feel anger without being ruled by it, to feel fear without being paralyzed by it, to feel jealousy without letting it poison a relationship. This is not the confidence of someone who has no wounds. It is the confidence of someone who has finally stopped being afraid of her own depths. And once a woman stops fearing her own darkness, a second transformation becomes inevitable, because the same conditioning that taught her to hide her shadow also taught her something else. Something even more dangerous. It taught her to live for the eyes of others. It started so early, most women don't even remember the exact moment it began. A glance of disapproval from a parent. A teacher's sigh. A friend's silence after you said what you really thought. Small moments, almost forgettable on their own. But children are not logical creatures. They are pattern recognition machines, wired for survival. And the pattern they absorbed was simple and devastating. Being yourself is risky. Being what others want is safe. So a quiet negotiation began, one most women never consciously agreed to. Trade authenticity for acceptance. Trade your true voice for a softer, more palatable one. Trade the parts of you that might inconvenience others for the comfort of being liked. And in psychology, we have a name for the identity that forms from this negotiation. Jung called it the persona.
Think of the persona as a mask, carefully sculpted over years, worn so consistently that eventually it starts to feel like your actual face.
It's the version of you that shows up polished at work, agreeable at family dinners, endlessly accommodating in relationships. It smiles when it wants to cry. It says I'm fine when it is anything but. And here is the tragedy hidden inside every persona. It was never designed to make you happy. It was designed to keep you safe. But safety and happiness are not the same thing. A woman can be safe from criticism, safe from conflict, safe from rejection, and still feel, somewhere beneath the surface, unbearably alone. Because no one can truly love a mask. They can only love what the mask allows them to see. This is the hidden cost of people-pleasing, and it is far greater than most people realize. Every time you silence your true opinion to keep the peace, you send a message to your own nervous system. What I think doesn't matter. Every time you say yes, when your entire body is screaming no, you teach yourself, on the deepest level, that your own boundaries are negotiable. And over years this accumulates into something devastating, not just exhaustion, erosion. The slow disappearance of a self. Ask yourself gently, without judgment. When was the last time you said no, and didn't apologize for it? When was the last time you expressed anger, and didn't immediately soften it with a smile? If those moments feel rare, or impossible to remember, you are not broken. You have simply been fluent, for a very long time, in the language of self-abandonment. But here is where the transformation begins to take root. Confidence, the real kind, not the performed kind, is not built by becoming more likable. It is built by becoming more honest. And honesty always costs something. It costs the comfort of being universally approved of. It costs relationships that only survived because you kept shrinking. It costs the identity you built to be palatable. This is why so many women describe their awakening not as gentle, but as disorienting. Sometimes even as a kind of grief. Because to reclaim your authentic self, you must first mourn the version of you that everyone else preferred. The nice one, the easy one, the one who never made anyone uncomfortable. And this is precisely where the word no becomes sacred. Not as rejection, not as coldness, but as the first sentence in a new language, the language of self-respect. When a woman learns to say no without a 50-word explanation, without guilt clawing at her chest, without needing the other person's approval of her decision, something shifts internally. She stops outsourcing her worth to other people's reactions. This is the difference between conditional confidence and true confidence. Conditional confidence rises and falls with validation, applause, approval, likes, compliments. It's a fragile architecture, built on external weather. True confidence is different. It doesn't need applause because it isn't performing for an audience anymore. It simply is. Quiet. Rooted. Unshaken by whether the room claps or stays silent. Somewhere in this process, something even deeper begins to surface. An old, almost forgotten misunderstanding about what feminine power actually means. For generations, femininity was quietly redefined as softness without spine, kindness without boundaries, emotion without power. Women were taught that to be loved, they had to be endlessly accommodating, warm, agreeable, easy to be around, careful never to take up too much space. But somewhere along the way, a dangerous distortion crept in. Softness became confused with weakness, and self-erasure became mistaken for grace. The truth, when a woman finally uncovers it, is almost shocking in its simplicity. Real feminine power was never about choosing between softness and strength. It was about holding both, simultaneously, without apology. The capacity to be deeply compassionate and fiercely boundaried, to be nurturing and unshakable, to feel everything fully and still remain standing. This is where intuition re-enters the story. not as some mystical accessory, but as a form of intelligence. Long dismissed by a world that only valued logic, intuition is the nervous system's accumulated wisdom, processed faster than conscious thought. It's the tightening in your stomach before you consciously register a lie, the instinct to leave a room before you can explain why. For centuries, this intelligence was labeled as emotional and quietly devalued, but the women who reclaim their power learn something crucial. Intuition and logic are not opposites. They are partners. One senses, the other analyzes. Together, they create a kind of clarity that neither can achieve alone. And from that clarity, boundaries stop feeling like acts of cruelty. A boundary is not a wall built to keep people out. It is a form of self-respect, communicating clearly, this is where I end, and where I begin. The old conditioning insists that boundaries make you unkind. But watch closely, and you'll notice something different. The absence of boundaries doesn't create more love. It creates resentment, slowly poisoning relationships from the inside out. True kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's self-abandonment, wearing a friendlier name. This is the moment a woman stops being emotionally reactive and becomes emotionally powerful instead. Reactive means her mood, her worth, her entire day can be hijacked by someone else's opinion, someone else's bad behavior, someone else's inconsistency.
Powerful means she can feel the full weight of an emotion, the sting of an insult, the ache of disappointment, and still choose consciously how she responds, not suppressing, not exploding, choosing.
But this kind of power comes with an initiation that almost no one warns you about. Because the moment a woman begins to stop abandoning herself, the moment she starts setting boundaries, expressing her true voice, refusing to shrink, something inevitable happens. People who benefited from her old, smaller self begin to pull away. And this is where we arrive at one of the most misunderstood experiences in the entire journey toward wholeness: loneliness. Almost every woman who has walked this path describes the same haunting phase. A period where the old friendships feel hollow, where family dynamics grow tense, where even romantic relationships built on her former self-erasure begin to crack under the weight of her new honesty. And in that silence, a terrifying thought creeps in. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe it's safer to go back to who I was. But listen closely, because this distinction changes everything. There is a profound difference between loneliness and abandonment. Abandonment is what happens when you silence yourself to keep others close. Loneliness, in this context, is simply the natural, temporary space that opens up when you stop performing for people who only love the mask. Jung believed that all real transformation requires a descent, a period of isolation where the old identity dissolves before the new one can emerge. Every mythology across every culture tells some version of this same story. The hero enters the forest alone. The seeker withdraws into the desert. The soul, before its rebirth, must first pass through darkness. This isn't punishment, it's initiation. And the women who endure this phase discover something almost no one tells them in advance.
Solitude is not empty. It is fertile. In the absence of other people's noise, you finally hear your own voice clearly for the first time in years. Preferences you'd suppressed begin to resurface.
Desires you'd buried start whispering again. And slowly, in that quiet, unfamiliar space, something remarkable begins to take shape. Not a woman defined by who loves her, but a woman defined by who she is, regardless of who's watching. This is where unhealthy attachment patterns finally begin to loosen their grip. The anxious need to check a phone the moment it goes quiet. The fear of being alone with your own thoughts. The belief that your value depends on being constantly needed by someone else. Emotional independence isn't the absence of connection. It's the presence of a self so rooted, so whole, that connection becomes a choice, not a desperate necessity. And it is here, in this quiet, solitary space, that a woman begins to glimpse something even larger, waiting on the horizon. Not the pursuit of a better version of herself,
but the return to a self she was never supposed to lose in the first place.